My myth, I chose the 10% myth, which is the myth that humans are only using about 10% of their brain power capacity. And I think this is a dangerous myth for many reasons. One is because a person who believes this myth could hurt themselves trying to quote unquote unlock these powers. It could go very wrongly. They could end up hurting themselves. And it's actually quite a bit of people who believe in this myth. A 2013 poll was done by the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and the poll found that 65% of the group of people that they interviewed believed in this myth. Another poll was done in 2012 in England and found that 43% of teachers were teaching their students this myth that you can unlock more brain power, which is completely false. And we know this for through medical research and science, but teachers and many people believe that this myth is true and go around spreading it. So, how did this myth come about? Well, a famous psychologist named William James wrote a book called The Principles of Psychology, and in this book, he wrote that we are only making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources. Um, and he was not talking about the 10% myth. That comes um, like 20, 30 years later. But this is the foundation for the myth because in 1920s, the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, written by Dale Carnegie, came out and directly referenced William James, and he wrote that the average person develops only 10% of his latent mental ability. Now, this myth then became cemented in 1929 when the World Almanac wrote, quote, "There is no limit to what the human brain can accomplish. Scientists and psychologists tell us we only use 10% of our brain power." Mix these quotes and books with the self-help era of the 1920s and 30s, and this caught wind really quickly. And people started to try to unlock the rest of their brain power through all kinds of crazy drugs and putting their bodies through crazy things. Now, the 10% myth isn't a direct cause of MK Ultra, the government experiment on human lives, but in my opinion, they are very closely related due to the military and government thinking that there could be something unlocked in the human brain that can control a person, can make them do certain things, and another person can have control. I feel these ideas are very closely related, and they were doing similar methods, not as extreme. Normal people, citizens, they weren't doing as extreme methods as the CIA, but it's still closely related methods. They were still, even the normal citizens were just taking high amounts of drugs that they could get off the street. Military was providing their test subjects so many kinds of drugs and too many kinds of drugs all at once in insane amounts that it just wouldn't be possible to get on the street or anywhere else. So, because of this myth, a lot has happened. People have gotten hurt, and in my opinion, it's closely related to MK Ultra, and it's just important that people don't take this myth too seriously, because as we can see here, these are media that is based off of this 10% myth. Right here, we can see the average person uses 10% of their brain capacity. What could she do with 100? Everything is possible. Open your mind. An extraordinary encounter with another human being. All of these movies are about the expansion of the mind, the opening of the mind, and being able to do more. And that's just not true. That's just not possible. Um, so this is the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And as we can see here, millions of copies sold. So millions of people were reading this quote. The average person only develops 10% of his latent mental ability. So due to all of this, I just find that the 10% myth is just extremely dangerous. And we know how this works because of brain imaging scans. An example would be the prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision making, is working constantly. All of your brain is just constantly working, constantly functioning, even if you're not aware of it, even if you're not really doing much. And even if parts of your brain technically aren't working, like let's say you're blind, your occipital lobe, which is responsible for your vision, would still be doing things. It would still be taking in other sensory input, even if you couldn't see. So even if all of your brain is like, if you're blind, those parts of your brain is always still working. So what I learned throughout this project is a lot of different things that the governments used to do. MK Ultra was a lot to research and crazy what they used to do to people. They just gave people so many drugs at once and then put them in some sensory deprivation tanks, extreme heat, extreme cold, exhausted them. They just did so many things to try to break the human mind. And it was also extremely interesting to learn how many people just um, died and how many people were a part of it. And there were many, many buildings and facilities like brothels or hospitals or colleges that were just in on this. Um, I found it extremely interesting what humans will latch onto and just take in as correct information, even if they have no real proof of this and it's just quotes going around in like a giant game of telephone. But I found this to be incredibly interesting, and I hope my PSA will help somebody know that this myth is false and they should just not pay attention to it. They should just not try to do anything with this myth because it's false and you could end up hurting yourself.